Hello, my name is Matt Williams, and I'm a GSRD psychotherapist, philosopher, queer activist, working in private practice with the LGBTQIA+ community. And this presentation explores sexualised drug use, otherwise referred to as Chemsex. And this is amongst men who have sex with men identifying as gay, bi, and trans, of which I'll be using the term Chemsex throughout this presentation. So, in the last week, we've seen news coverage discussing the darker aspects of Chemsex, where an ITV reporter shared the devastating impact that Chemsex can have, which sadly resulted in a young gay man's death. And within Stephen Maxwell's paper on chemsex behaviours amongst men who have sex with men, published in 2019, chemsex is described as the use of drugs before or during planned sexual events to facilitate, enhance, prolong, and sustain experience. Drugs associated with chemsex include methadone, methamphetamine, GHB, or GBL, including MDMA, cocaine, and ketamine. So I'm not going to go into the specific effects of each of the drugs contained in the table, because the table is quite self-explanatory. But the commonality of all the top 3 drugs all induce euphoria and a heightened sense of sexual intensity. So over the years, there has been a lot of public health concern around the transmission rates of HIV and STIs. And in 2019, when Maxwell et al. Published their paper called Chemsex HIV infections amongst men who have sex with men, counted for more than half of HIV infections. Chemsex parties are known for taking place in clubs, saunas, private homes, and studies such as Melendez-Torres in 2016 and Ober in 2009 evidence that 22 to 38% of encounters took place in clubs and saunas, with 52 to 66% of encounters taking place within private homes. So the late David Stewart identified that within 4 conversations, someone might be introduced to chemsex, and by the 8th conversation, they might be introduced to injecting or slamming. So in the documentary Chemsex, which included interviews with chemsex users, we can see how it might be difficult to discern where the drugs begin and the sex ends, or another way to put it, where the sex begins and the drugs end. So what do the drugs do? They increase stamina, they increase arousal levels, they make us feel less inhibited, and those feelings of emotions or high intensity and emotional connection become more apparent. And the late David Stewart suggested that it was the relationship to sex amongst men that have sex with men that causes harm. However, the question arises as a therapist is chemsex always problematic? And if we look through a Foucauldian or a minority stress lens of social constructionism, we can see the reasons why David Stewart referred to chemsex as the perfect storm. And as we can see from this slide, drug use doesn't always have to be problematic. It can be used and has been used by the queer community as a way to heighten connection, to explore sensation. However, the therapist's question to reflect on is chemsex usage always problematic? And as we've seen in the ITV news coverage, chemsex has been implicated in a range of activities from assault, rape, theft, grooming to sadly death. So it's a consideration for the therapist to know of local services that can provide appropriate support to clients. And at the same time, it's important for the therapist to know their own strengths and limitations, particularly when we're thinking about addiction, mental health, sexual needs, whilst collaboratively working with colleagues in substance misuse services and sexual health. So why did David Stewart refer to Chemsex as the perfect storm? Looking at this slide, we can see some of the contributing factors of David Stewart's perfect storm, which are bullying, negative attitudes to gay sex, loss, grief, isolation, the rise of social media apps such as Grindr, where men that have sex with men are 4 conversations away from entering into the world of chemsex. So how do we work with our clients who are struggling with their chemsex experience? And one of the ways that we can do that is through motivational interviewing and brief intervention therapy. So firstly, we're focusing on the containment of these themes. So focusing on reduction of chemical usage or abstinence. We're working with brief intervention therapy. And with brief intervention therapy, we're really talking about a 20 to 30-minute session. We're also actively partnering with other agencies. We're building trust with the client. We're being able to adjust interventions, importantly, and building the client's motivation. And this is really focusing on moving towards behaviour change. And of course, interventions can also work with a longer integrated psychotherapeutic approach, if appropriate. Let's talk about the cycle of change, because the cycle of change starts with pre-contemplation, where the client is still enjoying taking substances and having sex. Any attempt to provide therapy at this point may prove to be really difficult for the client, and the client may in fact become quite resistant. So the client will begin with a question, and the question is around their chems use. And they might begin to wonder if it's time to make changes to their chem use based on STIs or having had a negative experience. And a client may stay in this position for many, many months or even years, but at some stage they will move into preparation. Now, perhaps a client has already started to think about their chem use and move into action. And action really does mean that they've started to reach out to an agency. They're booking that important appointment. They start motivational interviewing and or stop using chems for a while. And action is the place where one stops using chems. It's a place of change and moving from what you used to do with chems and sex and stopping or minimizing. And this will flow through to maintenance, where you continue the action you've begun to reduce or you've stopped, and this can be maintained. In a perfect scenario, one would move directly to lasting change, but that's not likely. In motivational interviewing, the client will possibly relapse or lapse, and they'll lapse back into past behaviours. And this isn't to be seen as failure. This is where learning really takes place. Importantly, it's about what can we learn from this, and clients may move around the circle of change before moving into a position of lasting change. Motivational interviewing, or MI, has a set goal. It's behaviour change. It's directed by the client. And MI therapists use specific methods to elicit and strengthen what we call change talk. It's based on communication rather than on techniques, and it's facilitated communication that evokes change. So when we're talking about change, we're drawing out the client's dilemma. What is it that you enjoy about chems and having sex, for instance? Or what is less enjoyable about taking chems and having the sex you're having? It's collaborative. It's listening for change. It's listening for change talk. And it lets the client choose any changes that they might begin to consider, importantly. And part of this work is acknowledging ambivalence. So I know it's bad for me, but I still like it. The client wants to make the change, but at the same time, they don't want to make the change. So we're looking for change talk amongst the experiences of reticence. We're acknowledging that change can be really hard, and relational factors are to be considered in the outcome of brief interventions. The job of the therapist is to be alongside the client. What we're witnessing is change chosen by the client, and this change isn't necessarily going to be fast, it's going to be incremental. And we ask questions such as, what can the client achieve this week? Is it a week off chems? And if it is a week off chems, what is the reward to motivate that change? Perhaps it's not having a heavy come down. We also ask, what did it feel like last time you made a change? And what made that change possible? We might use a scale of 1 to 10 and ask, how important is change to you? And what can we do to get you to a higher score on that scale? So if the client has 3 to 5, how do we get the client from 3 to 5 to 6 to 10? Clients will be considering change and are in a place of action, and the therapist's role is to highlight the change if possible. So we're going to be using affirmations, congratulating any forward movement. And if there's no change, we're going to explore the difficulties and what might make it possible in the coming sessions to stay in that place of action. Chemsex is complex and can be an interplay not only between sex and drugs, but also between trauma, shame, pain, fear, dysmorphia, sexuality, gender. Brief interventions are very effective, but what they won't do is provide the backstory of the client. It usually doesn't provide the time for emotional exploration for understanding. Some themes to be considered, or flags to be considered, are, for instance, difficulty in having sober sex, difficulties enjoying things that were once really enjoyable, difficulties finding something new to be excited about. Chemsex lasts longer than anticipated, losing time from work, loss of time with friends and family, and motivation throughout the week is geared up towards doing chems. Feelings of sadness, lack of pleasure, anxiety, emotional outbreaks. Further examples of this could be described as loneliness, relapse, shame, isolation, or even IPV. On a final note, men who have sex with men do not necessarily enter into the world of chemsex because they're depressed or anxious. These themes usually occur after experiencing prolonged use of substances over many, many years, which is illustrated in Garrett Prestow's article on mental health, drug use and sexual risk behaviour, written in 2018. I hope this has been useful, and thank you for listening.